Welcome to Beth's Happy Home. I've been experimenting and researching artificial sweeteners and semi-artificial sweeteners for the last several months, and I've tried a bunch of them, and I've done a lot of research online about their various qualities, and so I thought that you would probably appreciate the results of my research. And so I'll start off by saying that all of these sweeteners are considered to be safe. There are actually two classifications of sugar alternatives that I want to talk about, and those are there are sugar alcohols, which have different properties than the artificial sugars that have no calories. Xylitol is very equivalent to sugar as far as it's a one-to-one comparison for sweetness. It has the same texture as sugar. It's a little bit coarser, but it has about 60% of the calories that sugar has. So it reduces the calories of sugar with an equivalent sweetness. And that might sound like a dream come true. However, it is quite expensive relative to sugar. But on the other hand, it does have one other quality that you need to know about. And I have a little story to tell about it. When my mom's household was dissolved, she had a great big 50-pound bag that she had bought that she was drawing from, using all the time. And it was mostly there. So I brought it home and figured I would try it. So I made up some cookies, and in my cookies I added some flaxseed, and I added whole wheat flour, and then I used xylitol. Well, when my son came home from school, there were warm cookies that were waiting on the counter, and I told him that he could have a couple of cookies for a snack. And so he got a little greedy and he ate a whole bunch of them. I think he confessed to eating 10 of them. And they were sweetened with xylitol and some brown sugar, but he had a huge dose of them. And now I have to say that he was already a little bit sensitive to the flaxseed and the whole wheat. He has to be careful about the fiber in his diet. But adding the xylitol gave him horrendous diarrhea, and he was miserable for a while. And he came in pale and shocked, saying, "What did you put in those cookies?" And we eventually figured out that it was the xylitol, and the research that I have done does admit that xylitol, if you have it in large quantities, can cause a lot of gas and bloating and even diarrhea. So you have to use this very carefully, and it is not just a straight sugar substitute. These two sugar alcohols, xylitol and erythritol, have the same thing in common in that even though they have the texture and the bulk of sugar, they don't brown, and so they don't caramelize, and so they don't cause browning, and they don't add the moisture that sugar is going to add to a baked recipe. And in fact, this erythritol can actually have the opposite effect of drawing moisture out of a recipe. So if you overuse this, it can cause your baked goods to be dry. Erythritol is absorbed very quickly into your bloodstream and then excreted through the kidneys out into the urine without being digested or absorbed. And so it doesn't ever make it to your large intestine like xylitol does, and so it can't cause the upset stomach or the upset bowels that xylitol can cause. But it looks like sugar, and it tastes similar to sugar, but erythritol is only 70% as sweet as sugar. And so if you were substituting it in a recipe, you would have to use 1.5 cups to get the equivalent sweetness to a cup of sugar. With xylitol, you could use 1 cup. But You're not going to want to do that probably because you're without doing a lot of adjustments in the recipe, because it does have the effect of making of drawing the moisture out. Another thing is that when this has been sitting in a bake, if you use it to bake something or in a recipe, the next day it's going to take on a different texture, and it's going to have kind of a cooling effect in your mouth that is similar to mint. So you have to be really careful with this. So you're going to want to use this in something that you're going to serve right away, and you're going to adjust for it. So both of these sugar alcohols are very good for your teeth, because not only do they not feed the bacteria that cause tooth decay, they actually kill the bacteria that causes tooth decay. When the bacteria feeds on these sugar alcohols, they die. And so that's why they use erythritol and especially xylitol in sugar-free gums. And when they say that they are good for your teeth, that's actually true, that they will improve the bacteria count in your mouth. So the next one I want to talk about is a very highly concentrated sweetener called Saccharin. Now you may have, this one is the brand Sweet and Low, and so this is not pure saccharin. Like these are both pure. Everything else that's, well, the aspartame isn't pure either, but these are pure forms of it, but I didn't want to buy a pure form of saccharin just because I don't think I will use it. Compared to some of the others, I feel like there's one that's superior. But anyway, many years ago, when saccharin was first being tested in the 60s, they did a bunch of studies to see if it was safe, and they found that when rats were fed high amounts, very, very high amounts of saccharin, that they tended to develop bladder cancer. But many, many, many studies since then have disproven that link, and they have found that humans digest saccharin differently than rats do, and so the warning labels have all been removed from saccharin products. So if you are sitting in a restaurant and the little packets of Sweet and Low are there on the table, they used to have a warning on them, now they don't, because that is not a danger. It is considered to be a completely safe sugar substitute. Some people notice a bit of an aftertaste with saccharin, but it is between two. I mean, this one is the one that has the biggest range, and I don't know how they determine the range in sweetness, because this one has a huge range. It says that it's between 200 and 700 times sweeter than sugar. So I guess maybe there are different concentrations of it. But this is, the way that this one is presented in Sweet and Low is 10 drops equal a teaspoon of sugar. And so this has been watered down, and which is essentially what I do with these other concentrates. And it is not known to have any side effects at all. Saccharin is not known to have any side effects at all. It's a matter of, do you prefer the flavor and how are you going to use it? Saccharin is heat stable, so it can be used in baking if you want to. And it has no impact on insulin, so it's a good choice for a diabetic if you want something sweet. Next, we'll move on to monk fruit. And it has about 100 times to 150 times the sweetness of sugar, but it has no calories, but it does have the disadvantage of not being heat stable, and that is that if you add it to something hot, or if you add it to baking, something that you're baking, it's going to lose its sweetness. And I had that experience the other day. I made some pudding and tried to sweeten it with monk fruit, and it didn't taste sweet at all. You couldn't taste any sweetness from it. But so if you're going to be using monk fruit, you sweeten things like drinks or Jello or something that you're going to serve cold, and it'll be great. But otherwise, it isn't suitable for baking, really. But that being said, it is often sold where it's mixed with something else like erythritol or something, and that is going to be heat stable. And so you're still not going to get the browning that you would get with regular sugar, the caramelization, but it makes the monk fruit more sweet. Or I suspect that it actually makes it so that the erythritol provides the sweetness and it makes it kind of more interchangeable. But I wouldn't use monk fruit for baking, even if it is cut with something else like erythritol. And so at that rate, you would need a tablespoon of monk fruit to make the sweetness of a cup of sugar. And so then a cup of water, cold water, by the way, and then use the water infused with it to do the sweetener. But I'm going to need a fork or something because, as you can see, it's such a fine powder that it doesn't want to break up in the water very readily. Anyway, I would label this monk fruit. You know what it looks like. Yes, you do know what it looks like. I would label it and just keep it on my shelf like this and then pour it in, recognizing that this 1 cup of water is the equivalent of 1 cup of sugar. It does have a little bit of a different flavor too that some people have objected to. And I don't really notice any particular, well, it does have kind of a little bit of a particular flavor. It's just very faintly bitter. So I'm not really a fan of monk fruit. It's besides that, I'm not sure I want that sitting on my shelf because it just looks too much like a sample I leave in the doctor's office. So the next one that I want to talk about is aspartame. Now, aspartame is sweeter than monk fruit. It's about 200 times sweeter than sugar. I don't buy it in bulk. I didn't want to buy it in bulk because I didn't want the expense of it. And aspartame gives me a headache. And it says in the research that I've done that it does have that effect on some people. It took me a while to figure out what was causing me to have headaches because I've never been prone to them before. But it doesn't bother my husband at all, and it's very widely used in drink mixes and things like that. Aspartame is made from combining 2 proteins that occur naturally in nature, but they don't combine in nature. So monk fruit is from a natural source, but it does have the aftertaste of the natural source. Aspartame is from proteins that are combined in a lab. And aspartame does have side effects for people with very rare conditions where they are sensitive to one of the proteins that is used to make aspartame. So if you have some of those conditions that are related to protein sensitivity, you ought to look it up and make sure that aspartame would be okay for you. But otherwise, for the general population, aspartame is considered to be completely safe. And so next, that brings us to stevia powder. Now, several years ago, I had a friend who had a stevia plant. And I was really curious about it because that was right when stevia was beginning to kind of catch on. And so I tasted a leaf of the stevia plant, and it was so sweet that it was more similar to bitterness than sweetness. It was horrendously sweet. You wouldn't think that a sweet flavor could be very unpleasant, but in its intensity that it was in that one little bit of a leaf, it was quite unpleasant. So stevia is 200 to 300 times sweeter than sugar. And if you were going to make the equivalent of a cup of sugar, you would use 1 teaspoon of stevia powder. according to the packages of stevia that are on the stevia. And you can see that it also is such a fine powder that it doesn't want to blend readily. But this is about the way that you're going to have to do it to use it in your household, just so that you can get a small enough quantity that you can use it in a drink or something, because it's really hard if you want to add a teaspoon of sugar to something, or a teaspoon's worth of sugar. How are you going to get 1/300th or 1/200th of a teaspoon? So by mixing it with water, you can use it like a syrup. And that again is going to need a little bit of a fork to finish dissolving it. But stevia is heat stable, but it has been very loosely linked, and they are still studying this to see the effect. But they have noticed in some of the studies that while stevia does not kill gut bacteria, it seems to interfere with the bacteria in your gut's ability to communicate with each other to maintain the healthy functions. Now, I mentioned gut bacteria earlier, and you may not know, but you have about over 1,000 different types of bacteria that live in your gut and are beneficial, and you need them for your health. And so stevia seems to have some sort of an issue with the communication between those bacteria. Now, I don't know what they're talking about. I couldn't find any site that explained what the communication should be, but it also, it's worth noting that you're going to eat such a tiny amount of stevia that I think that it would take a lot of heavy consumption before it's going to have any effect at all, because that is 1 teaspoon that is the equivalent of a cup of sugar. And so you're going to use this 1 cup of water as a sweetener, a teaspoon at a time, or maybe 2 teaspoons at a time, and so you're going to get like 1/32 of a teaspoon of stevia in that serving, or maybe 1/16. And stevia also is safe, and it is derived from, as I said, it's derived from a plant leaf. So they extract it and then they refine it, and as you saw, it makes a white powder. Look at what this monk fruit looks like now that it has thoroughly dissolved. I'm just saying. And why should I hold that against it? But no one in my household is going to want to risk putting that in a drink if they saw it. So the last one that I want to talk about is sucralose, which this is the one that I have been using the longest. It is the most concentrated of all of them. It is made by replacing 3 of the oxygen, hydrogen elements in a sugar molecule with chlorine, and by adding those 3 chlorine atoms in place of those oxygen hydrogen combinations, it makes it super ultra sweet. It does have the effect that adding that chlorine apparently has the effect of killing some of those beneficial gut bacteria. But here again, if you think about concentration that you would use, you need 1/12 of a teaspoon to make the equivalent of a cup of sugar. So this is a 1/4 teaspoon measure. There I've got 1/12 of a teaspoon, which is 1/3 of a 1/4, obviously, if you're a brilliant mathematician like I am. It dissolves in water instantly, and it is very heat stable, so that you can use it in baking, you can use it in hot drinks or cold drinks or anything like that. It has very little aftertaste. Now, and it has no calories. It passes through your body undigested, but it does have the effect of damaging the gut bacteria balance that you have in there if you use it over a prolonged period of time and use a lot of it. But the stevia has even more of a bitter aftertaste, as far as I can detect, than the monk fruit does. And the sucralose really does this taste like sugar water. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Very, very sweet. And the one thing that is tricky about all of these sweeteners is that the stevia and the sucralose and both of the sugar alcohols are heat stable. The monk fruit and the aspartame are not. The saccharin is also heat stable. You're going to have to kind of play with those recipes, or there are recipes online for each of these sweeteners that you can use. They're all going to be fairly similar in cost per serving, although in my comparison, the one that I've done, the sucralose is so much more concentrated than these others that it actually is the best buy. One other thing I would like to talk about is you've probably heard that people that drink diet soda tend to be more obese. And so I really looked into some of those studies, and I thought it was interesting because it turns out that those are observational studies. And so what that really is telling you is that obese people tend to drink more diet soda. And when they did a blind study where they were substituting an artificial sweetener in their soda and comparing them to ones that were drinking sugary sodas and others that were drinking water, the ones that were given the artificial sweetener in their soda every day for a long period of time, they tended to have a modest weight loss. And so scientists have concluded that there's a psychological element in using artificial sweeteners, and that is that if you know that you didn't get any sugar in that treat that you had, you're more likely to reward yourself by having something else that's sugary and calorie dense. But if you don't know that there was no sugar in there, you are going to have the benefit of eating fewer calories or drinking fewer calories as it is. So the idea that you gain weight from these artificial sweeteners is false. They're all safe. They do each have their own drawback, but I think that you would be well advised to start substituting them where you can if you're taking in too many calories, or you want to lose some weight, or you're concerned about your sweets intake. They can be very beneficial. Hey, thanks for watching.